Welcome to everybody who's attending this evening. You're all very welcome. I'm going to start off with some slides and then hand over to my colleagues as we progress through this presentation. So starting off very much at the beginning in terms of who EirGrid are and what is our role. So EirGrid essentially operates and develops Ireland's electricity grid, and ultimately the grid safely brings power from generators to the ESB network that ultimately supplies electricity to every home, farm, community and business in Ireland. It also brings power directly to large energy users like data centres, etc. We are a state-owned company, and it is our remit to ensure that everyone has power when they need it and at the most economic price as possible. Ultimately, as we look to the future, we're making the grid ready to carry up to 80% of Ireland's electricity to be generated from renewable sources by 2030. And to put that in context, currently we have about 36% of our generation coming from clean sources at the moment. So our ambition for 80% is quite a large target that we're aiming for here. And this project that we're here to talk to you about today will enhance that ambition as well. Next slide, please, Igor. In terms of the need for this project is the Meath North Dublin grid upgrade. Ultimately, the need for this project is to facilitate the increased electricity demand in the general area of East Meath and North Dublin. And this new circuit and grid upgrade will ultimately reduce the use of fossil fuels for electricity generation around the greater Dublin region and neighbouring counties, but it will more keenly secure electricity supply and strengthen that network in the area for the anticipated renewable energy that will be connecting offshore along the east coast and indeed onshore as well from wind and solar sources. Next slide, please. Here is a map showing the study area of the project that we have defined in step 3 of our framework for grid development. We'll go into a little bit more detail of how we've done that, but ultimately you can see an area bounded in a red dashed line. Within this red dashed line, this is where the project will ultimately be concentrated. On the most westerly point, you can see Woodland 400 kV station, and on the most easterly point, you can see Belcamp 220 station. These are the two end nodes to which the new circuit will be routed, and currently we have established that the best performing technology option to go from Woodland to Belcamp is an underground cable, and my colleague Christy, who will be presenting next, will go into a little bit more detail about how we made the decision in selecting the node of Belcamp and indeed the underground cable technology. Within this study area, you can see that there are a number of automatic constraints, being the road network and Dublin Airport, along with a number of environmental constraints and indeed with technology associated with underground constraints such as existing services and environmental constraints as well. Ultimately, the routing of the technology will be confined within this red line boundary, and as we move through our framework for grid development, which I'll explain a little bit now in the next slide, we will be confining all the work within this area going forward. Next slide, please. So how do we develop projects? EirGrid has a dedicated development process on how we actually take a project from its inception of need right the way through the various steps to the final stages of construction and energizing it. So this is our 6-step process, as you can see here on your screen. So starting out in step 1, step 1 is all about assessing the existing system and using different future scenarios to help identify and verify any issues down the line that may result in the need for a development in a particular area. We then move into step 2, which is all about developing a long list of technology options that might have the potential to meet that need that is identified in step 1 for the grid upgrade. The next step then is step 3, which is the current step for the Meath North Dublin project. And this is all about identifying the best option that is available to us within the specified area, which is the study area, which I've shown in the previous slide. In the case of this, we take account the various criteria identifying the environmental, technical, physical constraints within that study area. We then move into step 4, which is all about determining the exact location of where we build. So that's looking at the routing and where we will actually construct, and the potential routes and feasible routes will ultimately develop the project itself. And out of step 4, we'll have a specific route defined. And as part of that, we will be engaging with stakeholders, landowners, and doing an awful lot of consultation and engagement and looking for the public's feedback on the routes that we will be looking to develop. The next step then is the planning process, and that's in step 5. And this is where we obtain the statutory consents for the proposed development. And then after this step, we move on then to what I suppose would be the more visible step of it in terms of the construction, where we actually construct and install the circuit and move on to energization. And then following the energization of the project, then we move into the benefit sharing scheme in relation to community benefit, which Avril will talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. So this is handing over now to my colleague, Christy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jason. So what has happened to date on Meath North Dublin? The project is currently in step 3, as Jason took you through there in our 6-step grid development framework, the process. When coming into step 3, we had 4 options from the previous step. These are a short list of options. We took these forward and first of all defined our study area. So as you can see on the previous slide, we had Finglas and Woodland and Belcamp all included in the study area. Our 4 options were a Finglas to Woodland overhead line and a Finglas to Woodland underground cable, and for Belcamp as well, an overhead line option and an underground cable option. To assess these, we commissioned various feasibility studies that would look at both the technology options, the station elements of those, and consider any environmental factors. In fact, they will feed into our multi-criteria assessment, which I talk about on the next slide. Through these feasibility studies, which are also published on our EirGrid website, they're publicly available for people to review there. We were able to conclude through our multi-criteria analysis that the best performing option was the underground cable from Belcamp to Woodland. Next slide, please. So our assessment criteria, how did we come up with our best performing option? We looked at the technical aspects of the project. So that is our compliance with our safety standards, considering the operational constraint of the assets and the system reliability. We also took into consideration economic factors, so how much will the project cost to implement and how much will the asset cost over its lifetime. Also taking into account environmental factors such as biodiversity, the archaeological elements, surface water, ground conditions, habitats across the length or across the study area itself, and also taking into account socioeconomic factors such as local economy, the local amenities, any communities in the area, tourism, culture, and documenting those all in the feasibility studies. Deliverability factors as well, such as our implementation timelines, the design, the construction, any kind of permits or wayleaves that might be applicable for the option. And we took all of these feasibility studies and then we fed these into our final report for our step 3. And as you can see there at the center of this graphic is your feedback. So this is during our engagement period now where we're coming out to seek feedback on the option that we're presenting as our best performing option. Next slide, please. So what stage is the project at? As Jason said, we're in step 3. So now we have our best performing option and our nodes. we're coming to the end of step 3. We're working through our internal governance, and we'll be coming out of the end of step 3 at the end of this month. We will then be going into step 4, which will be more focused on actual route options within the study area. And that will be done by more detailed studies of the routes, constraints analysis, so that we can refine our routes, coming then back out into a consultation period later in the year. Next slide, please. So now that we have the best performing cable option, what does that look like to the general public? So the image there you can see on the left-hand side is an open cable duct. So that might be what it would look like during construction. So although unlike an overhead line, there won't be any visible infrastructure after construction. So that just gives you a feel there of what it may look like during construction, and the typical kind of stop-go arrangement for the road if we're putting in trenching on one side. As well, there you can see a cable being pulled with the spool there, and the workmen pulling the cable into the duct. This will typically be done in sections, and it'll be sections along the roadway. And then also we have a joint bay. There'll be chambers along the cable where there may have to be joints in the cable. So as I've discussed there, our current step that we're in and there that we're coming to the end of was our step 3, and that's our technology and node selection. We're having currently in the engagement period, and the community forum set up information webinar is in mid-July, there, the 14th of July. So in terms of next steps, whenever we enter step 4 in July, we're looking at our more focused route option identification. So we'll go into shortlisting of options, and hopefully whenever we come back to you for a consultation period, we would have 4 options, say, maybe that would be what we were aiming for 4 options, and then that we could have some more focused stakeholder, public landowner consultation period. And the feedback from those and our further technical studies, so as well as our consultation period, there will also be technical studies going on in the background to do cable integration studies to make sure that these new lengths of cable are going to be acceptable on the network. And also then feeding into our multi-criteria assessment till will be constraints reports and looking at what the cable routes, against our 5 criteria that I discussed earlier on. We will be coming out with a best performing route in spring 23. And then that would be the conclusion of our step 4 in spring 23, with a view to then progressing our planning applications or consents and whatever guise they may come in spring 24, with a construction programme beginning in 2026 to 2029.
Over the past 12 months, EirGrid have been establishing community forums on any new grid infrastructure projects. So we'll commence the establishment of a community forum on this project on East Meath, North Dublin over the coming weeks. So we'll be looking for expressions of interest for people from community groups to join our community forums. And we'll open up this expression of interest on the 4th of July, and we'll have it open for the 4 weeks in July. We'll also hold an information evening on the 14th of July, and we'll send out correspondence about this information evenings to all our stakeholders and through the local public participation networks, through the PPNs and through the local media as well. So what we want to do is establish a community forum for this project, and we're looking for membership from across an array of community organisations. So this could be from sporting organisations, community and voluntary organisations like a local community development association or a local community hall, or indeed any projects who are around enterprise or biodiversity. We'll also have local elected representatives from the relevant areas and municipal districts on these community forums, and we'll look to the Chamber of Commerce as well for representation and any other relevant stakeholders. Next slide, please. Please. Thank you. So the role of the forums and why we're setting them up: we want to consult with the community and engage with all our stakeholders. We want you, the community groups, to be able to contribute to the development of the routing principles, as Jason and Christy have talked about. We want you to help us in community mapping, and we want to build up local partnerships and for the co-delivery of the community benefit, which I'll talk a little bit about on the next slide. But mainly, we want you to be able to guide us as to how we should consult with you and how we should engage with you as well. So that's how you'll be able to do this through the community forum. Next slide there, please, EirGrid. Thank you. So a community benefit fund will be established for this project as well. Now, we won't know how much this community benefit fund, we won't be able to define that until the project itself is defined, the length of the project and where the project will run. But just to give you an idea, so the Celtic Interconnector project is a project that's the most recent project that was submitted by EirGrid for planning, and that project has a community benefit fund of 2.4 million. Now, the community benefit fund will have 3 streams. So we'll be looking for projects to apply that come in under a community strand, a sustainability strand, and a biodiversity strand. And this community benefit fund will be managed by the community forum and guided by the local community benefit strategy. So the community forum will come together and make a community benefit strategy for this particular project, but you'll do that with the guidance of an external community benefit, a fund administrator, and an external community forum facilitator, which EirGrid will put in place for these projects as we move forward.